Yeah. So here's how I'd like to do this. I would like to start out with my testimony and then take a small portion of that and talk about science for a little bit and talk about culture and then talk about, what does that look like? The behind the scenes transgender, what is it that we struggle with? How would you reach them, and things to look at as far as reaching out to somebody. So my story starts when I was like 3, 4, as far back as I can remember. I always felt that I should have been a boy. I felt that I had been born into the wrong body. And that goes back as far as I can remember. I can't remember thinking any differently. And so before I went to kindergarten, I would ride my bike over to my girlfriend's house and pick her up because we were going to get married. And then starting school was rather devastating. My mom made most of my clothes. And so because I was a girl, I had to wear dresses. And, I'm struggling with how I look and hating my body. So that was rough starting school. But all going through school, after a while, I got smart and I would take pants. So I would change my clothes once I got to school, and then change just before I went home so my parents wouldn't know what I was doing. Now my family life, it was rather dysfunctional. My dad he was emotionally and verbally abusive to my mom. And then I watched my mom, the weight of that abuse, I watched her crumble. And so as a little child, my takeaway was, and I didn't know this until I started my process out and the Lord revealed, but the lies that I took away from that was that women were weak, women were hated, and women were vulnerable. And so as I watched my mom, who was supposed to be my role model, she acted weak, she acted vulnerable, and she definitely acted, like she was hated. And so here I'm a girl, my mom is a woman, I don't want to grow up to be that, but here's my dad who's verbally and emotionally abusive. I don't want to be that guy. So I made a vow that I'm going to be the man my dad is not, and I will rescue women. So I'm growing up with those lies that are developing within me. And at the age of 7, my little brother was born, and that brought in another lie that, because when he was born, he was adored. My dad loved him, absolutely loved him, just, loved on him all the time. And so as I watched that, another lie that I took away was, girls can be replaced. And, in order for me to have that affirmation from my dad and to have that affirmation that I needed to be a boy. So I continued to grow up, and at the age of 10, I was molested by a family member until the age of 12, which, again, that reinforced the 3 major lies: women are weak, women are hated, and women are vulnerable. Otherwise, why would that happen to me if I wasn't vulnerable, if I wasn't hated, and if I would have been stronger, I could have stopped it. So therefore I am weak. My parents had a rental house and they rented to a family, and I became friends with their son, and he was 2 years younger than me. So at the age of 14, I revealed to him that I wanted to become a boy, and he was excited about that. And he was like, yay, yeah, now we can be brothers. And that was the affirmation I needed to tell me that I'm on the right road. I'm making the right decisions. So fast forward to the age of 19, I was at a place where I was desperate. I was desperate to get out of this body. I was desperate to get away from being a woman. The self-hatred was so deep within me that I had to escape. So I found a doctor, and he prescribed hormones, and I changed my name, moved out of the house, and I began to live as a man. I had moved in with a single mom's family. She had 2 daughters, and I thought I was free. I'm like, finally I can live as I've always meant to be. I finally can live as this man that I should have been all along. In this family, there were 2 daughters, and they were believers. And so, within 2 days of moving in, they kept asking me to go to church with them. And finally, I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe if I go to church with them, they'll stop nagging at me. So I went to church, and while listening to the sermon, he was talking about Jesus. And I was like, man, wow, who's this Jesus guy? I really want to know him, because he was talking about Jesus being your friend and, how he understands. And I was like, wow, I want him as my friend. I was raised Lutheran. And for me, I learned about God. I didn't really know anything about him. I didn't have that relationship about him. So I always joke about being a God stalker because, I knew about God, but I didn't know him. And stalkers know about their victims, but they don't really know him. And so once I heard about Jesus, I was like, man, no one's ever told me about Jesus. So one Sunday night, they did an altar call, and I went down and I accepted the Lord Jesus as my Savior. Now, I'd only been living as a man for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, when I accepted Jesus as my Savior. The next day when I got up, I felt nothing. Didn't feel a thing. Didn't feel different. Wasn't convicted. And I was like, man, did I do that right? Did that work? I don't know. And because I expected to feel different after accepting Jesus. I thought I was just going to be different. And since nothing happened, I thought, well, I'll do it again. Maybe I'll get it right next time. So for the next 2 Sunday nights, I took both altar calls, went down and accepted the Lord as my Savior. And the pastor pulled me aside and he said, I just want you to know that the first time that you accepted the Lord, the first altar call that you did, that pretty much worked. That took, you're saved. I'm like, oh, okay. So again, I get up the next morning and I still don't feel anything different. Now, I don't know what I expected, but I expected different. And because I didn't hear the Lord telling me I was wrong, I didn't hear the Lord telling me I had to go back. I wasn't struck by lightning. I didn't feel a conviction. I thought God was okay with the way I was living. So I continued to live as a man. Eventually, I got a job as a man, and it was through a woman that I went to church with. And so I grew up in Hillsborough, so I'm a local girl. And while I was working, my dad came in. He had figured out where I worked, and he talked to my boss, and he told my manager, that's actually not a man that's working for you. That's my daughter. And so I ended up losing my job for that. At the same time, the woman that I went to church with overheard the conversation between the manager and my dad, and she went to the pastors, and rightly so, she was concerned. The next time I went to church, I was pulled in and they're like, hey, can we talk to you? And they said, we're hearing some things about you, and we just want to know, who are you? Who are you really? And so I said to them, well, I'm a man who used to be a woman. And they're like, oh, well, we just want you to know that we love you. We really love you, but we can't have you coming to church here. So I'm like, okay. So, and I've lost my job, been kicked out of church, and I'm just like, wow. And I realized though in my heart somehow that wasn't the Lord. I don't know how I knew that, but I knew that wasn't the Lord. So eventually I found another job, still working as a man, still moving forward, living in the lifestyle. And I got another job as a man, worked there for, I don't know, probably 3-4 years. And a woman started there who was a believer, and her and I started dating. And it was actually her that helped me to understand that it wasn't just Sundays that I read my Bible, that it was pretty much every day. Because I'd go to pick her up and she'd be reading her Bible. And I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm reading my Bible like you're supposed to every day. I'm like, oh, well, okay, I can do that. So we dated probably about 4 or 5 years. And I started to go to her church and got involved in the orchestra. I played French horn in high school, and I approached them and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have a French horn player. So started in the orchestra. Well, after we broke up, I jumped right into a rebound relationship. And her and I dated for about a year. And in that year of dating, I started getting a pornography addiction, and it ended as a very deep pornography addiction. I couldn't go a day without watching it. And sometimes it'd be 2 to 3 times a day. I'd be watching pornography. What Josh McDowell talked about last night, if you were able to watch that, is true. It's very addictive. And so after dating this woman for about a year, I was still going to church, being in the orchestra. I woke up one morning and I realized, oh my gosh, she's my mom and I'm my dad. Everything I vowed I would not be, I had become. And everything I hated, I now was. And I realized I don't want to be this way. I don't want to treat her that way. And so I broke up with her because she deserved better. She deserved to be treated better than what I was treating her. So we broke up, and one night I was on my way to orchestra. And if you're familiar with Portland, I was just entering into the tunnels there from Highway 26. And as I entered into the tunnels, the Lord said to me, will you now? Will you now? So I take this inventory of my life and I'm like, I don't have anything standing in the way, got nothing to lose. So yes, Lord, I will. And it was about 3 months later that I realized when I said yes to the Lord, I was delivered from that deep pornography addiction. And when I listened to Josh McDowell last night, I realized the depth of the deliverance that the Lord had done. It's amazing. So this is fresh. I'm just like, oh my gosh, Lord, you did this deep work. You totally delivered me from this. I mean, I'm still free from that. When he delivers you, you're free. And so that's amazing. So I continued on at this church and in the orchestra. And I just opened my heart and my life everywhere to the Lord. I was so hungry for him, and I thought, this is my opportunity now. I'm not dating anyone. This is my opportunity to really dive deeply into the Lord and learn about what he has for me and learn about his promises and learn about him and his character and see who he is. And eventually, as I did that, I became a men's Bible study leader. And I began to be part of the junior high ministry. I had a small group of boys that I was a small group leader of. And then I was also involved in the college age group. And then I was also involved in the single adults. And I was just like, I couldn't be enough involved in church. And during this time, it was about a 4-year period from the time I said yes to the Lord. And during this time, the Lord brought to me spiritual parents. And I had confided in them, that because Gary, the spiritual dad, he was praying for me. And I was like, no, you don't understand what I'm really struggling with here. So I shared with him what I was really struggling because I wanted him to pray effectively for me. And so he didn't say anything about it. But then he happened to go to lunch with the pastor, and the pastor had gotten a call from a woman, and she was talking about, I just realized my husband has been a woman. And then so they're having lunch, and the pastor says to Gary, so I hear we have somebody like that in our body. And Gary's like, and the pastor said to him, and do you know who that would be? And Gary's like, oh, do I lie to the pastor and tell him no, or do I betray my friend and tell the pastor? So he decided to tell the pastor the truth. Well, that weekend I was on a junior high retreat, and I'd come home, and by then I'd gotten another girlfriend, and this girlfriend was pretty serious. We'd started talking about getting married. Now, remember, I looked like a man. I was still living as a man, and I told nobody anything. So nobody knew anything of who I was or my past or anything like that. And so when we came home from the junior high retreat, my girlfriend calls me and she's like, hey, can we go to the Sunday night service? I got to say, those junior high kids, they wore me out. But I'm like, okay. So we met there at church, and after the service, my spiritual dad came up to me. And he said, can I talk to you for a minute? And I'm like, sure. And I'm thinking, oh, I know what this can I talk to you thing is, because I think I'm going to be confronted. So I followed him, and we went behind the sanctuary, and behind the sanctuary was this prayer room. And one of the pastors, Dave, was sitting there. And I knew Dave. Dave and I had hung out. He was the pastor over the the college age group. And when I walked in, saw him sitting there, I'm like, yep, I'm going to be confronted here. So I sat down and Dave says to me, we're hearing some rumors about you, and I just want to know, who are you? Who are you really? And this time I responded with, I'm a woman living as a man. And that was the truth, because I was never a man who used to be a woman. I had always been a woman living as a man. And when I confessed that, the Holy Spirit went, and it blew into me. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I don't know what just happened, but in that moment when the Holy Spirit blew into me, I saw I have to go back to being a woman, period. No other questions. I have to go back to being the woman that he created me to be. And I need to meet with these pastors, and I need to begin to step down from those ministries, and I need to tell them why. Oh, and I need to go break up with my girlfriend. It was just matter of fact. And so I said to Dave, so Dave, what do you think I should do? And Dave says, well, I hadn't told anything to Dave. So Dave has no idea what I'd seen. And Dave says, well, maybe you could live as a eunuch. I'm like, no. And he's like, well, okay, how about maybe you could live celibate? And I'm like, no. And he's like, well, how about you, well, maybe you could, how about you, yeah, I don't know what you should do. I just don't know. So I said, well, can I share with you what I saw? And he's like, yeah, sure. So I shared with him, I need to go back to being a woman. And I need to step down from these ministries. I need to meet with these pastors, and I need to break up with my girlfriend. And Dave says to me, okay, you know what? I'm going to walk with you through this, and I'm going to make those appointments with those pastors, and I'm going to be with you in them as you step down from those ministries. I'm going to support you in this. Okay, way different response than from the first church. But if you look at it, the first church, I lied. Second one, I told the truth, which opened the door for the Lord to begin his work. And so met with all the pastors, stepped down. At that point, I was living up in Vancouver, and I moved back to Portland, and I started the process out. I also found the Portland Fellowship, which I am now a part of, and began their program there. And it took about 5 years of working through everything that I needed to work through, forgiveness of my dad, and understanding who I was as a woman. And at that 5-year point, I'd stopped taking the hormones, prior to that, probably, within a couple of months of saying yes to the Lord and stepping into becoming the woman that he created me to be. And at that 5-year period, it was hard for me because I couldn't really work as a woman because physically I didn't really look like a woman. So I was working as a man during day, coming home at night, trying to figure out who I was as a woman. And finally I'm like, okay, I can't do that. So I crossed back over and began to live as a woman, changed my name back, and stepped into ministry. After 5 years of my process, I stepped away from the Portland Fellowship because I wanted to go somewhere where I wasn't known, so I could be known as the woman that God had created me to be, rather than, I'd be approached and people would be like, so are you the one that used to live as a man? I'm like, okay, I have a name. So that was good. And then the Lord he drew me back to the Portland Fellowship. And in doing so, I became a small group leader. From there, I began to teach. And then from there, I joined the board and became the chair. And then a couple of years ago, the opportunity opened up for me to become the women's ministry leader. So that's where I'm at now with the Portland Fellowship, being part of that program. So that's my story. I do have some pictures to show you just to give you an idea of what I look like as a man living there. And let's make sure. So this is me at 5 years old. I remember this day. I remember being there with Santa Claus. But when I look at this little girl, I think, who are you? I can't quite connect, though I remember I can't quite connect to who this little girl is. This is my high school picture. And as you can tell, my hair is real short. This is, you know, a year before I transitioned. And that shirt is probably the most feminine thing that I owned, which was not very feminine. Here I am with my niece's first birthday. And I don't remember how old I am in that picture or how long I had been in the lifestyle either. Here I am at a wedding. That is not my girlfriend. That was my girlfriend's niece. And that's what I look like as a man. Here I am here in a group. This was the college age group, and this is me right here, off to the left there. This was my birthday. The men's group that I was leading threw me a surprise birthday party. I was at a wiring conference for the job that I worked at. So this really shows that, you know, what I look like living as a man. This is at the Pendleton Roundup, and I joke about this picture because, you know, I said the whole time I lived as a man, I always wanted to be a cowboy. That was my thing. And now that I'm not living as a man, I say I want to marry a cowboy. This is a glamour shot. This was taken actually in 1997. And it was used in the Portland Fellowship newsletter when my story first came out in the newsletter in 1998. And then here I am as a bridesmaid. This is probably about 10 years after I've been out of the lifestyle. And so there you have what I looked like as a man. Let's see here. So I lived as a man for 11 years, took hormones that entire 11 years, and I've been out of the lifestyle now for 27. So that's my story. The last bit of truth I like to leave you with is that I am just not the man I used to be. Okay, so I want to touch on part of the science part of it, not a whole lot. So most of the studies have been around the gay lifestyle as far as, is there a gay gene? And there was a study that came out last year in 2019, and they're like, no, there is no gay gene. This was a massive study. There was like 480,000 people, I think, all around the world that was observed and tested. And they did two groups, some who had done with same-sex, had sex with same sex, and some who had same sex with the opposite sex. And they found that there were some significant genetics with those who had same sex, but when they combined them together between the two groups, they found it was like 1%. So it wasn't even a big thing. Also, one of the things that I found, scientists said a genetic arrangement that's based on a large number of markers across the genome means that virtually all human beings have this arrangement, or large portions of it. In other words, not only did the study fail to find some controlling gene for gay identity, it also established that gay persons are not genetically distinct from all other human beings in any meaningful sense. So essentially, we might say that those who are gay have the perfectly normal genome. I found that interesting. There was also one comment and this was just a small portion of another study that I read. It said, instead of a person's attraction of the same sex is shaped by a complex mix of genetics and environmental influences, is similar to what most other human traits. So what they're saying is that there's this whole big combination. However, we also think part of it is environmental, which everybody struggles with. You know, it's pretty much the environment can shape you into who you are. So transgender DNA, there's really nothing I could find as far as a genetic study on transgender DNA, as far as was there a transgender gene? Most of it went around the gay gene. But I did find this very interesting. There is a trans man, so it's a woman living as a man, approached me and asked me if I wanted to come into the hormone fight of it, and eventually shared with me that this person had a friend who is a trans woman, so a man who's living as a woman, wanted to find out the heritage. You know, am I American? Am I European? Am I German? Am I Italian? Whatever. And so this person sent in their DNA to 23andMe, and because they identified as female, they checked the box female and sent in the test. About 3 weeks later, they get this letter back, and on the letter it says, "We're sorry, we cannot complete your DNA testing at this time. Your DNA results are showing as male, while your intake card is showing as female. Please correct your intake card and return to complete your testing." And I was like, oh my gosh. So here you have male DNA and you got this card that's saying female, and a company that doesn't really care. You know, they're just testing your DNA. They're not out there to prove a political point. They're not out there to say, no, you need to change the way you're living. They just said, DNA says male and your card says female. It's incongruent, and one thing has to change, and it can't be your DNA. It has to be the card. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, a very secular company that doesn't really care is saying, yeah, that was incongruent. So it comes back to, we can't change our DNA. We just can't change our DNA. So I want to touch now on the cultural part of it. Again, it's going to be a broad sweep, mostly for the sake of time. So in the cultural, I was reading through the word and I came across Proverbs 14:12, and it says, "There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." And I was like, oh my gosh, that's our culture right now. Things that feel right, you know, these are the ways that we're going. If it feels right, then it's the truth. If it feels right, then that's how you have to go. If it feels right, then that's who you are. And, you know, when I was watching Joe Dallas last night, I loved what he said when, you know, truth is an emotion. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's truth, you know, because everything is, if it feels good, then that's what you do. And, you know, feelings actually tell us sometimes that there's actually something else that's going on. And culturally, they're not willing to step into that, to look at the why. Why are you feeling this way? Instead, we just want to go, oh, you feel that way? Must be true. Here's your hormones. Go live as a man. Go live as a woman. And I was very saddened because the culture has also swayed the church. And I just read an article yesterday about Pope Francis. He just said that he is, I can't think of the word right now, but he is affirming civil unions. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's, you know, because the Catholic Church has been one that's really kept the line saying, no, this isn't right. But now they are affirming that. And Rick Joyner said at one point, you know, the church will be the church when it stops being defined by the world. And I think that is absolute truth. Because I see the church, you know, they want to be sure that they don't offend people by saying, this is what we believe. We believe that, you know, living a gay lifestyle or living transgender is wrong. And that is a very fine line, though, too, to have them come to your church while you stand in that truth and yet, you know, allow them to walk out that healing. You know, that's a very fine line. And then also, I want to go into a little bit of the Bible as far as what I saw, what the Lord showed me when I was walking out. You know, in Genesis, it talks about, you know, God created a male and female. You know, he created them on the sixth day, and he said, you know, they are very good. And that's the only place in the Word where God says, this is very good. And when I read that, you know, here I am trying to embrace who I am as a woman. I'm like, how is that very good? I don't see this as very good. I've struggled my entire life with trying to be, you know, a woman, thinking I'm a man. Now I'm coming back out of that. And now you're telling me this is very good. I mean, it was affirming, but at the same sense, I'm like, I don't know how to embrace this very good thing. And so I went to the famous passage, Psalm 139, knows when we're right. David talks about when God knows when we're rising, when we're sitting, all that stuff. And then in verse 13, he says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." And that's the NIV. In the New King James, it says, "You formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb." And as I studied that out, I was like, Lord, so you knit me together as a woman. What does that mean? And what I saw was an intentional God. He knit me together on purpose for a purpose. And when he knit me together inside feminine. And as he knit me together, he gave me everything on the inside I would need to be feminine. Then he put skin on to represent how I'm knitted together on the inside. So if you look at the outside, you go, oh, woman, knitted together, feminine. Same with males. Knitted together, masculine. On the outside, we go male. And I was like, that's phenomenal. But, it also goes on, I think it's in the next verse where it says, your works, I'm marvelous are your works, for I'm fearfully made. That was a very bad paraphrase, I'm sure, but, fearfully and wonderfully made, and as I thought about it, I'm like, I know that's truth. I know that that's truth. And the way that I know that that's truth is when I lived in the lifestyle, there's a toughness men have I could not imitate it. I could chase after it, but I couldn't ever obtain it. But yet there was a nurturing quality about me too that would leak out every once in a while. And one of them was I worked in a warehouse with all these manly men, and we're taking a break. It's a beautiful sunny day. We're all standing outside, and this little thing comes floating by. And what do? I catch it in my hand, and then I'm looking at it, and I go, and I blow it away. Now that's really not a masculine thing to do. And all of the guys in the warehouse are like, what was that? What are you doing? And then also when I stepped down from the junior high ministry and I met with the pastor and told him, I'm actually a woman, I'm stepping down, God's called me back to being the woman that he's created to me. And he's like, well, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm like, why is that? And he's like, well, I would watch you with these junior high boys and I would think to myself, wow, what a really great woman he would be, because I was so nurturing with them. So even though I lived as a man, there was my knitting together that would leak out. I would still function in that because that's how I was knitted together, and I couldn't put on what men have because I'm not knitted together that way. So as we go into the root causes, it's DNA. We can't change our DNA. There's not a gene. If I wasn't born that way, then what was it that really took me into that lifestyle? Well, as I mentioned before, there was the 3 lies that formed my belief system. I would be hated, I'm vulnerable, and I'm weak. And I didn't want any of those things as a woman. And so if I'm living as a woman and identified as a woman, that's how I will be treated. And from that, the deception entered and began to build this whole belief system. And as it did that, that was my outward, that's what I looked out through. And those lies also came, I found that there was 3 main roots. There's rejection, abandonment, and abuse. Now they spread themselves out and they can bear a whole bunch of different fruit. But those, when it comes down to it, those were the 3 main roots that I dealt with. And within rejection, there was the perceived and the real rejection. And the perceived rejection would be like, no, I'm sorry, you can't have that. And to me, it's like my mom just said, no, you're bad. You just can't have that. So I saw that as rejection rather than my mom's protection for me. And then abandonment, which includes emotional and physical. Now my parents physically were there, but emotionally, I was totally abandoned. I was alone with my emotions. I didn't know, there was nothing I could connect to with either my mom or dad. And my mom, when my mom and dad would get into those places of fighting, my mom would come to me and look for her affirmation. Now I'm a child. I had nothing to give. She should have been pouring into my cup. Instead, she's taking from my cup. And so that told me that if somebody's going to love me, it's going to cost me, and I don't have it to pay. I can't pay it. So I immediately cut off from my emotions because that's too painful. And then there's abuse. There's emotional, physical, sexual, and verbal. All of those leave a mark. They just leave different marks. We always think of sexual abuse, such as rape and sodomy, molestation, are the worst. They're bad, but so is emotional. Emotional, goes around in your head. And I would say all of those areas of abuse, they all go around in your head, and they all give you the wrong picture of who you are. They all speak the lies. They all tell you, your takeaway from that is, I'm bad, that shouldn't have happened, and it affirms the lies that you already believe. So now there's also the wounding that happens. When you're wounded, if somebody comes up and they stick their finger in that wound, you respond from that wound. At least I did. If you're going to reject me, well, then I'm going to reject you. And sometimes I'm going to reject you first so you can't hurt me by rejection. See, because I couldn't see the way things are, all I could see was the way I was. And so in looking out through that, I didn't know how to be different. And I want you to understand that transgenderism is not a sexual issue. It's not a sexual issue. I didn't want to live as a man so I could have sex with women. I wanted to live as a man so I could be safe. It's actually a relational issue. And when we look at that, when we look at the behaviors, even in the whole LGBTQ community, when we look at those behaviors, that's actually fruit of a deeper wounding that tells you that, they've had some trauma somewhere in their life. They've been abused, or, it's been super hard. They've been wounded, they've been rejected, and so this deception that covers them that's hard to get through is there for their protection. And it all came because of broken relationships, or relationships that were supposed to pour into them and didn't. And in some ways, there are legitimate needs that have gone unmet. And so they go into this lifestyle going, I'm going to get that need met. And this is the way I know to get it met. Our culture says sex equals love and love equals sex. So if you love me, you'll have sex with me. And since I love you, I'll have sex with you. And now we have intimacy, which isn't true. It actually still leaves you empty. And I have found that even though I took hormones and I thought I was free, there was still something in the background that was running that was still not okay. And I think we have to understand too that even though now I didn't have many surgeries, and those who have had the surgery, it intensifies that thing that we're trying to press down, which is all that pain. I was trying to escape pain. I was trying to escape, being found out and being hurt as a woman. I wanted to be safe. And so I ran from that. And the understanding that I've come to as far as, the behavior and looking beyond that has come from my walking out with the Lord. I didn't know that when I was living the transgender lifestyle. I didn't know that my behavior represented all this pain. And every once in a while, it would come out sideways. This pain would come out. Somebody would put their finger in a place of a wound and I would explode. And they'd be like, okay, whoa, I'm not sure what that was about, but that was a lot. And so I want to share with you too, one of the things that I know the Lord, how he saw me during that whole time. I was preparing for a teaching at the Portland Fellowship, and it was on identity. And as I prepared that, I realized that there was a lot of things I was free from, tremendous things I was free from. I'd gotten previously delivered from the pornography, and I was thinking about that, and I'm like, you know what? I don't struggle with an attraction for women. It's just not there. I don't desire to be a man any longer. Don't, nothing against guys, but yeah, I don't want to do that again. I also didn't struggle with the fear that I used to deal with. I used to struggle with the fear in people finding out who I am. That was a deep fear. I didn't struggle with just a ton of stuff. And so as I thought about that, I couldn't even figure out when it changed. I didn't even know how it changed. And it was a mystery to me, because I'm thinking about this and I'm like, I'm taking inventory of my heart and I'm like, it's just not there. So I asked the Lord, I'm like, Lord, so when did these things change? Because I made a vow I would never go back to being a woman. And here I am. And I said, Lord, when did that change? How did that change? How did you change my thinking? And I saw the Lord do this. He's pondering my question. And he looks up and he says to me, I don't know. I'm like, okay, wait. How do you not know? How do you not know? And besides, I know you were there. I know you walked with me. I know you saw me. How do you not know? And the Lord said to me, I never saw you that way. And it was in that moment that I realized the Lord had only ever saw me as his daughter. He only ever saw me the way that he created me to be. He only ever saw me through those plans that I had made. The way that I lived as a man and all those behaviors never defined me. It never defined me. It didn't take away from me being his daughter, ever. And I was blown away by that. And so, in fact, I found this scripture. It's Romans 8:38. And it says, for I'm persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And I have to say, something's missing from that passage. As I looked at that, I'm like, something's missing from that passage. My past, your past, is missing from that passage, because we're not defined by our past. The Lord never defined me by my behavior. And so when we look out over the LGBTQ community, we have to understand that that's what they're doing. And they're doing that out of woundedness. And they're doing this because they're trying to get those needs met that should have been met growing up. And, my past isn't in there because it's been paid for. It's totally been paid for by the Lord. And he has a plan for us, and we have an intentional God. He's created us on purpose for a purpose. And he's intentional about that because he never saw me that way. He's like, yeah, these are the things that I saw you through. My daughter, my plans for you. And so that's all I have. And I just want to say, a question, who are you really? Because that's who I am really. I am his daughter. And he's able to bring us out through so much stuff and heal so many things. There's things that I'm free from I didn't even know I was in bondage to until he brought them. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good one. Let's get rid of that. That's a good thing to walk out of. So I want to open it up now. I know that there was questions, or hopefully there was questions in the chat that came about. So let's do the questions.
First of all, thank you. A viewer had said, thank you for being so vulnerable. And yes, it's so true. Thank you for that. And then it's too bad we weren't all like live with you, because I think you would have heard us laughing with you, kind of, choking up a little bit. And there was a lot of, in our room anyway, there was like, there was so much of that going on. So we just really, really do appreciate it. So one of the questions a viewer had was, is how can or should we, as the church, come alongside people walking the journey you've been through?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm going to say that's a really fine line. When they come into the church, there was 4 years that I was in the church that the Lord was wooing me to him. And I was living as a man. I didn't reveal anything. But once that was out there and that was confronted now, and I made the choice to go back to the Lord, I believe, because I had changed churches too, and the church that I changed to walked beside me. I believe that if they're able to be open with the church, and depending on the church should be able to come alongside them and encourage them in who they are. And that's not necessarily dragging them into the identity, because there was well-meaning people they were like, I think you should be doing this, and I think you should be doing that. And it's like, okay, Lord, but what do you say? Having the heart of the Lord. So if it's found out that they are transgender and there is a confrontation and they're willing to change, then the church should be able to come alongside. And also, if there's a place where they're not willing to change or they want to stay in that place of deception, then the church needs to make a decision as far as, it's kind of like, if you want to serve the Lord, it's such a hard line because you don't want to kick them out either, but there's also a place where if they're in that deception, that's rebellion. And how are you going to deal with that rebellion? Are you going to ask them to leave? It's like those who are in adultery. If they continue in that behavior, there comes a place where you have to make a boundary.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm wondering it's because you did such a great job that there aren't any more questions.
What?
But if you do, I know. But if you do have one, I encourage you to put them in the chat. But I think for us too, when we were sitting, we were all on the edge of our seat listening to you and hearing your story. So I think that was part of it too, that we're all just so engaged with it. So we just appreciated you sharing that though. So if you do have questions, you can even take your mic off and you could share it. I won't give you my sign, and so you can, if you wanted to just ask Kathy directly, that's fine with us as well.
It looks like John Dotson, he asked to be unmuted.
Let me see.
He's right there.
So you would have to just, if John wanted to say something, he would have to unmute himself and it should work.
Oh, okay. I thought I saw that. I don't know. Maybe my cursor was over that as well.
Oh yeah, I think that's what it was.
Sorry, John. Is there any personal questions you guys want to ask as far?
Do
you think that there's people in our church that are just afraid to ask, not our, but any church, afraid to ask or say anything?
I do. And the fear is, my experience has been is, first of all, they're not quite sure what to say. And so that brings about fear. Also, they're afraid of rejecting that person who is struggling. And we perceive that rejection. We feel your rejection. And so we're like, I don't know what to do with that. And I don't know what it is that you want to know about me. And also to talk to them, to help them to feel welcomed is, even if you don't know what to say, it's good to walk up to them and go, hey, I noticed you today. Welcome. It's great to see you, or it's great to see you again. I'm glad that you're here. And then maybe sit by them. It's coming alongside. It's not necessarily that you have to bring them out of the lifestyle. It's being Jesus with skin on. And I think about Jesus at the well. He went to the woman and he didn't say, yeah, I know about your lifestyle and you need to change. No, instead he's like, hey, I got this living water for you. And it's for us to be in that same compassionate way. I don't know. Did that answer the question? I felt like maybe I just danced around it.
I think so. Okay, so Brad is thanking you and he appreciated your powerful testimony. He teaches public school. What should I know about students that are transgender to try to help them?
Yeah, that's a really hard one. And I know that in the public schools, you're kind of stuck because in the public schools, you are asked to affirm, and that's really hard. Again, it comes down to getting to know that child, getting to become their friend, and then pushing into them, and hey, I hear that you're transgender. If you're able to do that, that could be a leap. But pushing into that and just asking, how are you? And how are you doing? And do you need help with school? Because the person in their struggle, they need to know that they're safe. And once they feel safe, my guess is that they would probably begin to open up to you with the struggle. I'm really struggling today, especially if you notice that they're not doing well, or you have a sense that they're kind of down that day, and asking them, hey, you look kind of down today. You doing okay? And at that point, you have that open door, and hopefully they'll take it and they'll go, I'm really struggling today. I'm struggling with, my mom calls it dysphoria, and I struggle with my body image today. And that's a place where you can come in and affirm them. Why are you struggling with your body? I think you look great. So it's getting to know that child on a level where they feel safe. And then hopefully eventually, as you continue to open those doors and just come alongside them, love on them, affirm them, and not necessarily affirm their identity, but affirm who they are. So it's looking past that behavior, or even the name or the pronoun that they want to be called, and looking into who they are. And also a big one is asking the Lord, who do you say that they are? Who are they? How do I speak into that? How do you see them? Because, he knit them together too. And to look into that and begin to speak that truth into them, that's powerful. Prayer is the best weapon.
Thank you. Okay, so you talked about rejection, abuse, and abandonment. Is this always a role in folks who are transgender or struggle with gender?
I think those roots are in everyone. I think we've all been rejected. I think we, in some way, have all been abused. Maybe not to the degree of those who are in the LGBTQ lifestyle, and abandonment. We've all been abandoned. We have all been abandoned by a friend. Not necessarily parents, it could be just friends. It could be, that you had to move and there's that abandonment felt. It comes in all different forms. For me, it became a place of, I had to escape these feelings. And so to do that, I had to take on a different identity, because that identity was going to allow me to distance myself from them. Now with the LGBTQ lifestyle, you don't realize those are the things that you're dealing with. But I would say, those are the main roots in everybody. Everybody's been rejected. It's how they manifest in your life that is the fruit that they produce. Sometimes they're sexualized and sometimes they're not.
Thank you. Okay, they're rolling in, Kathy. And we're looking about 5 minutes left. So, all right, where did it go?
I'll try to be shorter and sweeter then.
In the workplace or non-Christian social circles, how do we take a stand for what we believe and still be sympathetic and supportive without being canceled?
Right. So where I work, no one knows that I'm a believer. And it's not that I'm hiding. It's just that I see where I can come alongside them. And the minute that you tell them they're a Christian, you can see their hair starting to bristle. And so I just come alongside them and I listen to them, and, I can empathize, yeah, you know what? I've gone through that too. That is hard. That is hard. And when you get down that road is, that's what led me into the gay lifestyle. And, you can offer. Have you ever thought about, what that would be like to work through those issues? You can love them without having to tell them that their lifestyle is wrong. And sometimes by the way you love them, it brings them into a place of conviction. You're different. Why are you accepting of me? Well, I see your pain. For me, I can empathize. I understand where you're at. And I know there's a different way to live. I know that, I've dealt with some of that pain, and there's been great healing, and I found it in Christ. So you can give them your testimony without putting that on them. It's like you hold it out. This is what's happened for me. This is what I've gotten out of my relationship with Christ. So it's telling your story in a way that you're not pushing Christ on them, but you're offering it.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Herb Gray, he had a question in his own breakout room about using preferred pronouns in a school setting. So what is your recommended way of handling that, either in school or elsewhere?
Yeah, the pronoun thing, that is such, you walk a really fine line with the pronoun thing. In the school setting, especially if you're a teacher, I think you have to abide by the rules. Yeah, I have to say, I hate this question. It's just super hard because in the school setting, you know, there's a certain way that you have to abide by. And if this child comes up to you and says, you know, today I need to be addressed by he, going forward, I'm going to be he, then your role as a teacher is you have to use a he. Now, outside of the school setting, if it's a close friend and they're like, you know, because it's like levels of relationship too, and responsibilities of your job. In levels of relationship, you know, there's that conversation, if they're close, if they're a family member saying, I can't do that. You know, this is where I stand. This is what I believe, and having that conversation. If it's a casual friend, they come up to you and they're like, hey, you know, I'm transitioning. I prefer to be called he. I would say, you know, I'm going to have to think about that because I don't believe in that way. You know, I think living that way is wrong. And it's trying to prolong. I honestly, my take is I refrain from using their pronouns. In a public place, it's a little more difficult. You know, here it's a she and you got this boy and you're like, yeah, so this person, you know, or if they have like a neutral name, even that is difficult because you are affirming the lie. I try to stay away from those things that are going to affirm the lie. And, you know, if they're going by Pat and in a public setting, I can go Pat. You know, there's very little room for compromise. The name is one of them, but the pronouns, again, it's a hard one. And the truth sometimes is hard to stand in that because you do look like you are being legalistic and you are condemning. And, but still you got to stand in the truth without compromising that.
Thank you. I appreciate that affirming that lie. Yeah, that was an interesting way of putting it. So thank you for that. We unfortunately are all out of time and there were still a few. So I do appreciate everyone with their questions. Thank you for attending. And then if you go back to the homepage for my the people that are guests today, you can catch Josh McDowell. He's doing one more little session, A Skeptic's Journey. So you can check that out. I want to thank you, Kathy, so much for being here. And we just really appreciated hearing your story. And yeah.
Is there a way people could contact you?
Oh, is there a way people can contact you if they wanted to continue to ask you questions or? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You can email me at KathyGrace, all one name, no space, KathyGrace at portlandfellowship.com. And if you forget to write that down or you didn't get time to write it down, you can go to the Portland Fellowship website, portlandfellowship.com. And there's a link there you can email. And Jason, the executive director, is very gracious about forwarding those to me pretty quickly. But please, KathyGrace at portlandfellowship.com. I'd be happy to respond.